It's good to see you all this morning. We're in our third week of our mission stewardship series, and I'm thinking probably by now most of us are going to be able to say our mission statement together without looking. So let's try it one more time. Here we go. Our mission is to save souls, grow saints, and serve suffering humanity in the heart of Flint. Let's try it one more time. Here we go. Our mission is to grow saints. Sorry, I threw you off. Try it again. Our mission is to save souls, grow saints, and serve suffering humanity in the heart of Flint. Much, much better. Good. Well, if you recall, the first week, then when we started this series, we concentrated on the first part of our mission statement, to save souls, and we had to ask ourselves, what would we be willing to pay? What cost would we be willing to pay for someone's salvation? And then last week, we looked at the second part of our mission statement, to grow saints, and we asked ourselves another question about our own sanctification, because we can't give away what we don't already have. Well, today we're going to look at the third part of our mission statement, which is to serve suffering humanity. And we're going to be using the passage that Lisa read for us earlier. So you want to open your Bibles to Mark 10:35. And this morning I'm going to be using the New International Version for my message. Now you want to know that there's also an account of this same scenario found in Matthew 20. However, it's just a little bit different there. If you were to read the Matthew account, you'll see that James and John went together with their mother, Salome, to Jesus. And she knelt before him and she said, "Grant that one of these two sons of mine would sit on your right and the other at your left in your kingdom." Now, if you were to read that, it would be interesting to note that Jesus never responds directly to her, but instead starts to address James and John right away. But whether Salome is the one who began this conversation or whether it was James and John doesn't really matter. The main point here is that either these brothers or these brothers and this mother had this conversation together to figure out what would be in their best interest and how they could become great and have these special positions, and then they went to talk to Jesus about it. So let's look at this Mark account. Mark 10, verse 35. So we see here that James and John begin by saying this to Jesus: "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." Now that's pretty bold, don't you think? I mean, of course, Jesus wants us to go to him with our requests, but I'm not sure that this is the best way for us to approach him. I mean, if someone said to me in that way, I might be just tempted to say something like this: "Now, hold on a minute. Instead of telling me, why don't you ask me?" Not just, I want you to do for me whatever I ask, but may I ask you to do something for me? It seems a little bit more polite, doesn't it? Nevertheless, Jesus was very patient with them and asked them what they wanted him to do for them. And this is where it gets really interesting. But before we go there, we're going to back up just a little bit to the verses just prior to this so that we can get a little bit more context into what's happening. So look back at verses 32 to 34. This is what they say. They were on their way up to Jerusalem, with Jesus leading the way, and the disciples were astonished, while those who followed were afraid. Again, he took the 12 aside and told them what was going to happen to him. "We are going up to Jerusalem," he said, "and the Son of Man will be betrayed to the chief priests and teachers of the law. They will condemn him to death and will hand him over to the Gentiles, who will mock him and spit on him, flog him and kill him. 3 days later, he will rise." got one. All right, here we go. Okay. So this is what Jesus says, that he's going to be killed. And then James and John turn around and they ask him or tell him they want him to do whatever they ask for him. I mean, did they hear what Jesus had just said? They were going to go to Jerusalem and Jesus was going to be killed. Now, this is the third time that Jesus had predicted his death and told his disciples about it like this. So, do you think that James and John understood what was happening here? Perhaps somewhat, but I think that there were definitely some things that they didn't understand. How do I know? Because of what they wanted him to do for them. And what was that? Well, when Jesus set up his new kingdom, they wanted him to have one of them sit on his right and one sit on his left. You see, that way they were going to be in the positions of honor when Jesus would reign in his new kingdom. So then what happened? Well, the other disciples heard this, and they got upset with James and John. But before you get behind them and thinking that their motivations are pure, thinking, maybe in their minds they might be saying, what? How could you ask such a thing? They were more likely upset because those were the positions they wanted, and James and John had just beaten them to the punch and asked Jesus about it first. They all still had a lot to learn. So what was Jesus' response? Well, true to form, Jesus did not simply answer their question. He answered their question with another question. You see, contrary to what James and John thought, they didn't really understand what was about to happen. They were trying to figure out what was it going to take to experience greatness, to be in these positions of honor. But it turns out that what they were seeking was actually to be found in just the opposite way of how they were going to go about it. So how is greatness measured? How does greatness go with servanthood? This morning we're going to be exploring 3 ways to measure greatness, and none of these ways is trying to promote yourself. Of course, this is contrary to what the world teaches, but we know that the kingdom of God is not of this world. So look back at Mark 10, verse 38. Verse 38 gives us the first way that greatness is measured. Here we see the question that Jesus asked James and John in response to their question about them sitting on their right and their left. He asked, "Can you drink the cup I drink, or be baptized with the baptism I am baptized with?" So what does this mean? Well, in several places in the Old Testament, the cup is referring to suffering or punishment, usually at God's hand. Psalm 75:8 says, "In the hand of the Lord is a cup full of foaming wine mixed with spices. He pours it out, and all the wicked of the earth drink it down to its very dregs." Isaiah 51:17 says, "Awake, awake, rise up, O Jerusalem, you who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, you who have drained to its dregs the goblet that makes men stagger." And Jeremiah 25:15-16, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, said to me. Take from my hand this cup filled with the wine of my wrath, and make all the nations to whom I send you drink it. When they drink it, they will stagger and go mad because of the sword I will send among them." Do you see a common theme here? This cup Jesus is talking about is not some partying cup, but nor is it some kind of deep spiritual meditation time. It was suffering. It was feeling the wrath of God. And isn't this what Jesus was predicting he was going to go through? He had just gotten done telling them that he was going to be betrayed, condemned to death, mocked, spat upon, flogged, and then finally killed. And this is just what the people would be able to witness. That doesn't describe the depth of what he would feel and experience when it comes to Isaiah's prophecy, Isaiah 53:6, where he said, "And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all." This is why Jesus cried when he was hanging on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" He was feeling the wrath of God. He was experiencing what should have been God's wrath upon us. This is what Jesus was talking about when he asked if they could drink the cup that he was going to drink. And it's a similar situation with being baptized with Jesus. This isn't referring to being baptized as an outward sign of an inward grace, being gently dunked into a baptismal or even a small body of water. Instead, it carries with it a violent image connected with sorrow and grief. It's the sense of being totally plunged forcibly beneath the waters, cast into the depths. Now, I'm guessing that James and John probably weren't thinking along these lines, but even if they had had the most minute inkling of this, they certainly did not understand the depth of the suffering that Jesus was going to go through. But Jesus understood, and he went through it. And how great is he for doing that for us? You see, greatness isn't measured by your position. It's measured by your sacrifice and suffering. Thomas à Kempis, author of the great devotional book, The Imitation of Christ, wrote this: Jesus hath many lovers of his heavenly kingdom, but few bearers of his cross. All desire to rejoice with him. Few are willing to endure anything for him or with him. So what are you willing to suffer for Jesus? What are you willing to sacrifice for him? Because that's how greatness is measured. That's how it's measured in God's kingdom, and that's what servanthood is all about. Well, now the next place we see how greatness is measured in this passage we find in verses 43 and 44. Jesus said, "Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be slave of all." Just prior to this, he had explained how the Gentile rulers lord their position over all those that they're under their authority. There was not even a hint of any kind of servanthood in their exercise of authority. Of course, this is exactly the opposite of Jesus, right? Jesus was a servant leader. Listen to how one man, familiar to many of us in the Salvation Army, learned his lesson of servanthood. The great holiness preacher and author Samuel Logan Brengle served for more than 40 years in the Salvation Army. And he really had a big heart for evangelism and personal ministry when he was a young man. And he, in fact, had turned down an offer to take a very renowned church because instead he wanted to apply to serve in the Salvation Army. But William Booth, our founder, said this to him: "Brengle, you belong to the dangerous classes. You've been your own boss for so long that I don't think you will want to submit to Salvation Army discipline. We are an army, and we demand obedience." But Brengle was undaunted, and in 1887, he was promptly sent to work by the Salvation Army to shine boots in a dingy cellar. Well, after he had been there a little while, and he was kind of wondering about this apparent waste of his time and talent, and because he was tempted in his heart for rapid promotion, he prayed, "Lord God, am I burying my talents? Is this the best they can do for me in the Salvation Army? Am I a fool?" But as quickly as he had prayed that, the answer came. Because God brought to his mind Jesus, who was washing his disciples' feet, his own Lord performing such an unimportant and lowly task. Well, years later, this is what Brengle wrote about that time of shining those boots. He wrote, "It was the best training I could have had. I was practicing humility. That experience put a key in my hand to unlock the hearts of lowly people all around the world for the next 40 years. You see, greatness is not found in lording our positions over others. Instead, it's like being like Jesus and washing people's feet. It's stooping to lowly positions. it's getting dirty. So we have to ask ourselves another question. How dirty are we willing to get? Serving others can get pretty messy. Jesus washed his disciples' feet, their dirty, smelly feet. I mean, think about it. Feet can be pretty disgusting. I'm not going to go into any details because I don't want to gross anybody out, but you know what I mean. Feet can be gross. But Jesus didn't care. He got down and he got messy. How messy are we willing to get in our own servanthood? Because that's how greatness is measured. It's measured by lowly service. And the third way greatness is measured is by humility. Look at verse 45 now. Jesus said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, this is not a very long verse, but there is a lot to this verse. First, we see that Jesus refers to himself as the Son of Man. Now, when he does this, which he did many times, and in fact, it's the title that he gave himself to most often, it teaches us 4 things about him. First, it shows us that he's the fulfillment of prophecy. Daniel 7:13-14 says, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and men of every language worshipped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed." See, here, Daniel refers to one like a son of man. So when Jesus calls himself Son of Man, he is saying that he is the fulfillment of this prophecy. Which leads us right into the second thing that this teaches us, which is that the Son of Man, that title, is a title of deity. Now, that may seem strange to us at first, but looking back there at Daniel's prophecy, we see that one like a son of man approached the Ancient of Days, or God. God then gave him authority, glory, and sovereign power. Everyone worshipped him. His dominion is everlasting, and his kingdom will never be destroyed. And you see, the Jews of Jesus' day understood this to be a prophecy of the coming Messiah. So that's why when Jesus was on trial for his life, and they asked him, "Are you the Christ, the Son of the living God?" And he answered, "I am, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." They said it was blasphemy. Jesus was calling himself the Son of Man, saying he was the Messiah. It was a title of deity. And they condemned him to death for it. And while the title, Son of Man, is a title of deity, it is also a title of humanity. You know our doctrine, which says we believe that in the person of Jesus Christ, the human natures are united so that he is truly and properly God and truly and properly man. We read in John 1 that the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. In 1 John 4, we read that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh. He was a man. Fully God, yes, but he was also fully man. He took on human form. He was born of a woman. He was the Son of Man. And then fourth, and most important really for our message this morning, Son of Man is a title of humility. Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, God himself, left heaven's glory and took on human flesh, becoming Son of Man, being born in a manger. He was despised and rejected. He had no place to lay his head. He ate and drank with sinners. He suffered at the hands of men. Philippians 2, starting at verse 6, says this: "Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant or a slave, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. You see, greatness is measured by humility, not exaltation. James and John and the rest of the disciples, they had it all backward. They wanted to sit at Jesus' right and left to help him rule over the kingdom, when they should have been doing what it says in Philippians 2, just a few verses earlier, where we read this. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but in humility consider others better than yourselves. Each of you should look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. Isn't that what Jesus was all about? Isn't that what we should be all about? Others? Many of you know that we are huge Wolverine fans, as are many of you. And it was a great day in our house a couple of Mondays ago. And we're looking at getting some fanware that says National Championship on it so that, everyone will know all about what we are about as far as college football goes. But when it comes to fanware in God's kingdom and the measure of greatness, the word that should be emblazoned across our chest is the word others. We're to act in humility, not in any kind of degrading way to ourselves, but in a way that helps and serves others, in a way that lifts them up. I think that sometimes we get the idea that humility is the idea of thinking badly about ourselves and putting ourselves down. Rick Warren, who is the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, described humility this way. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's thinking of yourself less. What a great definition of humility. And as the Son of Man, that's exactly what Jesus exemplified. Let's look back at verse 45 again. What else does it teach us? Jesus said, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." Jesus never asked to be served. He certainly deserved it, but that was never his attitude. Instead, he was the one who served others. He washed feet. He healed sickness. He healed blindness with spit and mud. He cast out demons. He taught people. He loved. This is what we're talking about. But of course, Jesus' act of service did not end with acts of washing people's feet. In his humility, he paid the ultimate price when he gave his life as a ransom for many. Jesus was so much about others that he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross, because he knew it was the only way that we were ever going to experience forgiveness and the only way that we would ever be able to have a right relationship with God. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on a cross. Crucifixion, the most horrible means of execution. Yet Jesus willingly, in his humility, went through it for us. That's a lot to take in. But we have to take this even a step further and ask ourselves how willing we are to be humble. How are we in our own humility? That's the measure of greatness, the third way that we're stewards of servanthood. Our mission is to serve suffering humanity. I think too often that we leave this part of our mission statement to our social services department. We help people with various needs in those offices, and we think that, that's the Salvation Army, we're the Salvation Army, so we're serving suffering humanity. But somehow there's a disconnect there. We have no personal investment there. So what do? Well, there are many folks in this congregation who do things behind the scenes. They do things that people never know about. Things like donating items to people who need them, giving money anonymously to someone who needs it, taking people out for a meal, participating in events such as Serve Day. This is how we serve suffering humanity. Now, this morning, we've looked at 3 ways to measure greatness as we've talked about being stewards of servanthood: a willingness to sacrifice, lowly service, and humility. And I want to challenge you to make these attributes a part of your everyday life, following the example of Jesus as we strive to serve suffering humanity in our attempt to be stewards of our mission. We're going to close by singing the song that we've sung the last couple of weeks. And I hope by now that these words are really sinking into your hearts and your minds. Because, they describe the suffering humanity that we're talking about. And maybe, as we sing it today, some specific people might come into your mind. Or maybe some specific ways that you can serve will come to mind. Write them down. Make an action plan. Because ideas are just ideas and really don't mean much unless they're put into action. Our mission is to serve suffering humanity. Who are these people? The people listed in the song. You may not know them. You may never see them depending on how you serve them. Or they may be your neighbors. They could be the person sitting right next to you. Whoever they are, they need you. They need me. And they need Christ. Won't you sing this together with me?